All right, our next section for the DNA unit notes deals with learning target 1, being able to identify the structure of DNA and explain how it can be copied, as well as serve as a code for making proteins, which basically are your traits. We're going to focus on just that first part there, the structure of DNA. Can you identify the structure of DNA? So you're going to have to be able to describe and model the structure of DNA. Now, keep in mind that DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. That's where the DNA comes from. And if you remember, nucleic acids are one of your 4 macromolecules that we studied in the macromolecule unit. It's just that we didn't give them much time then because they're not found per se in the foods you eat, like your proteins and your lipids and your carbohydrates. But this is your genetic material. And so it's very, very important because your DNA holds all your instructions for how the whole rest of the cell is going to function. And so that's why we spend so much time. This is like a unit all by itself because your DNA is so important to how your cells function and thus how you function. So we're going to first of all describe the shape of DNA. And DNA is what we call a double helix. That means it's like a twisted or a spiral ladder. Like if you took a ladder and just kind of twisted it into a spiral shape, like a spiral staircase. So this right here, down here, this is a double helix. There's 2 strands and it's twisted into that spiral shape. Now the sides of the DNA, or what we call the DNA backbone, is made up of alternating sugars and phosphates. Okay, so here you have the sugar for DNA is deoxyribose. That's why you have a D right there. So that's actually your sugar, deoxyribose. Okay. And then in between it is that little P that stands for a phosphate group. So when we say that it's an alternating sugar phosphate, it means it goes sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. And you see both sides are like that. Here's sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. And as it does that, it's twisted into this double helix. Okay? Now those sugars and phosphates are joined by very strong covalent bonds. So in between them here, these are covalent bonds. Also between the sugar and the base there, those are also covalent bonds where you'll find those. Okay, so those are strong bonds. And then in the middle, if you look here, you'll see that there are pairs of nitrogen bases. So if you're thinking of the ladder analogy, these pairs of bases here would be almost like the rungs of a ladder as you go up. You know, as you're climbing up a ladder and you grab onto those, the middle part, we call it the rung. That's what those pairs of bases would be. And they always bond in a specific manner. A goes with T, adenine with thymine, and cytosine goes with guanine, or C with G. Okay? So you have to remember those base pairs. Remember, Erwin Chargaff is the one who came up with those base pair rules. It's going to be very, very important when we talk about DNA replication, when we talk about transcription, that you know how those bases pair up. So always remember A with T, C with G. Or you can just, if you want to remember it, you can just think of you have an awesome teacher, right? And you are all cool guys and gals. Okay? So C with G, A with T. Okay? But these bases are held together. You can see that the bonds in between them here. These are held together by hydrogen bonds. And hydrogen bonds are very weak. And that's going to be very important when we talk about that later on, okay? That's going to be important when we talk about DNA replication. So those are all parts of the basic structure of DNA. So we're going to get into some more specifics now. DNA is 2 strands. That's why we call it a double helix. 2 strands of nucleotides bonded together. Remember, the nucleotide was the subunit or monomer for nucleic acids. So don't forget everything you learned back in your earlier units, because we always build on that. Okay? So the 3 parts of a nucleotide then are a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. Those 3 parts will always make up one nucleotide. Now, since we're talking about DNA, the sugar here is deoxyribose, okay? So that's going to be different when we talk about RNA, but for DNA, it's deoxyribose sugar. And then again, these are your 4 nitrogen bases. Adenine, which we'll always show with a symbol A, thymine with a symbol T, guanine with a symbol G, and cytosine with the symbol C. It's a lot easier than saying those big words. Okay, so here we have one nucleotide right here. It's made up of a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. In this case, it's cytosine. So we would call this a cytosine nucleotide. It's named after whatever base is attached to it. But you can see that DNA is made up of 2 strands of these nucleotides all bonded together. Okay, so here are all these nucleotides, and they're bonded together. How are they bonded together? Well, remember, they're held together by weak hydrogen bonds. C always goes with G, T always goes with A. Okay? So let's take a look at the specific nitrogen bases that there are. We know that there's A, C, T, and G, but we can break those down into 2 major groups. What we call the pyrimidines, which is a single ring structure, and that includes thymine, cytosine, and a nitrogen base called uracil, but that's only in RNA. Okay, so we won't even talk about that too much right yet. The purines are a double ring structure, and they include adenine and guanine. Now, a way that I like to remember this is, and my college professor taught me this because I went to school at Morehead State. And Morehead State, now I think it's called Minnesota State University at Morehead, but back then it was Morehead State. And we have what's known as the Tri-College University with NDSU, Morehead State, and Concordia. It means you could take classes at any one of those campuses and pay the same tuition for it. You could even hop on a Tri-College bus and go to those, okay? Well, when you see this, Tri-College University, it forms a pyramid, like a triangle, like a pyramid, but we now can use that to represent thymine, cytosine, and uracil. Okay, those 3 make up the pyrimidines. And the way I remember that they're a single ring structure, remember I told you Concordia was part of the Tri-College University? Well, when people graduate from there, they usually get they get a Concordia ring when they graduate to kind of show off that they graduated from Concordia. I'm teasing. Concordia was one of our rivals. That's why I'm being kind of sarcastic there. But it's a very good university, or college, so if you go there, it's wonderful. Okay, so that's the way I remember it. Purines, I like to think of the PGA, which stands for the Pro Golfers Association, which I think is very pure and pristine, thus purine. And guanine and adenine are part of the purines. So that's what helps me remember. If you guys can come up with a little mnemonic device that helps you, that would be great. How do you remember it's a double ring structure? Well, I always figure when I golf, I usually get like a double bogey. Well, actually, it's worse than that. My husband said we always stop counting after 10 strokes because I'm that bad. I can never. I think I try to hold the golf club like a baseball bat or something, so it just doesn't work very well for me. Okay, so those are your two groups of bases. So we're just going to finish up here with just a little bit of practice then. Let's look at all these structures that are marked by arrows. Do you remember what the T stands for? That is the nitrogen base thymine. The A, adenine. That's another nitrogen base, and those two are always bonded together. The D is your sugar, and the reason there's a D by it is because it's deoxyribose. Okay, the phosphate group, that's what the P stands for. And notice these alternate down the side, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. What kind of bonds hold the phosphate and the sugars together? Covalent bonds. They're strong, okay? So the sides of your DNA molecule should never break apart there. And then we have G stands for guanine. C stands for cytosine. Remember, those are two nitrogen bases again. And you remember what kind of bond holds those two together? Hydrogen. So all of your bases are held together by hydrogen bonds, which are weak. That's going to be important later on. Okay? And what do we call one nitrogen base, one sugar, and one phosphate all together? That's called a nucleotide. DNA is made up of a whole bunch of repeating nucleotides, like two strands of nucleotides joined together. And then those two strands of nucleotides are all twisted up to form this almost spiral staircase or spiral twisted ladder. And what do we call that again? The double helix. Okay, those are all things you're going to need to know as far as the structure, because you're going to have to make a model of this and explain it to me later on this week.